Most people think of self-discipline as a problem of motivation or character, but the Nyāya tradition would say the real problem lies much earlier than behavior, earlier even than emotion. It lies at the level of knowing. Gautama and Kaṇāda, the foundational thinkers of these schools, approached human suffering not as a mystery of the soul or a flaw of willpower, but as a failure of cognition. When people act inconsistently, avoid necessary tasks, or sabotage their own intentions, Nyāya does not ask how strong their will is. It asks a quieter and more unsettling question: what are they believing, and why do they think that belief is true? Nyāya philosophy begins with a radical claim that sounds almost modern: human action follows judgment. You do not act because you feel like it, you act because you believe something about reality, even if that belief is unconscious. If the belief is wrong, action will be distorted. Discipline, then, is not a matter of forcing behavior into shape, but of correcting the invisible reasoning that shapes it. This is why Nyāya treats discipline as epistemic hygiene, a continual cleaning of the ways we form conclusions. At the center of this framework is prama, valid means of knowledge. Nyāya carefully identifies how knowledge is properly acquired through perception, inference, comparison, and reliable testimony. What matters for discipline is not the technical list, but the principle behind it. Not all thoughts deserve equal trust. Feelings, impulses, and moods may arise vividly, but vividness does not equal truth. A thought can feel urgent and still be false. A conclusion can feel obvious and still be invalid. Most failures of discipline occur because this distinction is never examined. Consider the common internal sentence that quietly governs behavior: I feel resistance, therefore I shouldn't act. This sentence rarely appears explicitly, but it is constantly assumed. Nyāya would identify this as a faulty inference. Resistance is a mental state, not a command. The conclusion that action should be avoided does not logically follow from the premise that discomfort is present. Yet because the mind does not distinguish between sensation and inference, the conclusion feels justified. Behavior then obediently follows an error. Nyāya's genius lies in slowing this process down. It teaches that inference must meet strict criteria to be valid. There must be a reliable connection between premise and conclusion, established through repeated observation and logical coherence. Just because something has happened before does not mean it must happen now. Just because discomfort accompanied failure in the past does not mean discomfort predicts failure in the present. Discipline collapses when the mind treats loose associations as laws. This is where causal realism becomes essential. Nyāya holds that the world operates according to real causes, not moods or wishes. Actions produce effects through specific mechanisms, not through emotional symbolism. Whether you act while feeling confident or insecure, the causal chain of action remains largely the same. Writing a page, making a phone call, or beginning a task does not require the absence of resistance, it requires only the correct causal conditions. When the mind confuses emotional readiness with causal necessity, discipline becomes hostage to feeling. From this perspective, one of the core disciplines within Nyāya is the discipline of separating experience from conclusion. You may experience boredom, anxiety, or reluctance, but none of these experiences logically entail inaction. They are data, not directives. Training the mind to pause at this junction, to ask what is actually known, rather than what is felt, begins to restore agency. Discipline emerges not from suppressing emotion, but from refusing to let emotion masquerade as knowledge. Another discipline implicit in this framework is learning to test beliefs against outcomes rather than against comfort. Nyāya insists that valid knowledge must correspond to reality. If you repeatedly believe that acting while uncomfortable leads to disaster, but observation shows that action proceeds adequately anyway, then the belief must be revised. This willingness to revise beliefs is itself a form of discipline. It requires intellectual humility, the capacity to admit that one's internal narratives may be wrong. Nyāya also emphasizes the discipline of precision. Vague beliefs produce vague behavior. When people say, "I'm not ready," Nyāya would ask, ready in what sense? Ready emotionally, cognitively, technically? Often the belief collapses under examination. You may lack enthusiasm, but possess sufficient skill. You may lack clarity, but still benefit from beginning. Precision weakens the emotional fog that paralyzes action. Equally important is the discipline of distinguishing correlation from causation. Many people assume that past emotional states caused past failures, when in fact both were effects of deeper conditions such as lack of structure, unclear goals, or poor sequencing. Nyāya trains the mind to look for actual causes rather than emotionally salient ones. This shift alone can restore discipline, because it redirects effort toward conditions that can be changed instead of feelings that must be endured. As this rational discipline takes root, behavior begins to stabilize without force. You act not because you feel inspired, but because the reasoning supporting action is sound. You stop waiting for motivation because you recognize that motivation is not a valid prama. It is not a reliable source of knowledge about what should be done. Action becomes grounded in understanding rather than mood. In this way, Nyāya offers an ancient but strikingly modern lesson: most people are not undisciplined, they are misinformed. Their inner logic is flawed, their inference is sloppy, their trust misplaced. When reasoning improves, discipline follows naturally. Not as heroism, not as self-punishment, but as the quiet consequence of seeing clearly what actually leads to results. As this way of thinking deepens, the problem of discipline begins to look less like a battle of wills and more like a series of unexamined assumptions quietly directing behavior. Nyāya would say that most people are not failing to act, they are acting perfectly in accordance with what they believe to be true. The tragedy is that many of those beliefs were never tested. They were inherited from past experiences, social conditioning, or momentary emotions, and then treated as facts. Rational discipline begins when these beliefs are brought into the light of scrutiny. One of the most pervasive assumptions Nyāya exposes is the belief that internal resistance is evidence of danger. The mind feels friction and immediately infers that something is wrong. But Nyāya asks a different question: what is the actual causal link between resistance and harm? Often there is none. Resistance may arise simply because the task is unfamiliar, cognitively demanding, or threatens a self-image. None of these imply that action will cause damage. When this false inference is corrected, resistance loses much of its power. It can still be felt, but it no longer dictates behavior. This correction introduces another discipline within the Nyāya framework, the discipline of delayed inference. Instead of immediately concluding what a sensation means, you suspend judgment. You notice discomfort without deciding what it implies. This pause is not indecision, it is epistemic restraint. It prevents the mind from jumping to conclusions based on incomplete data. Over time, this single habit dramatically increases consistency because it breaks the automatic chain between feeling and avoidance. Nyāya also trains attention toward distinguishing necessary from sufficient conditions. Many people believe they need confidence, clarity, or motivation before acting. Nyāya would classify these as neither necessary nor sufficient. Confidence may accompany action, but it does not cause competence. Clarity may increase with action, but it rarely precedes it. Treating these states as prerequisites is another logical error. When the mind stops demanding unnecessary conditions, action becomes simpler. Closely related to this is the discipline of causal sequencing. Kaṇāda's Vaiśeṣika system emphasizes that effects arise from specific arrangements of causes. If a result is desired, the correct sequence of causes must be identified and implemented. Emotional states are rarely part of that sequence. Writing improves through writing. Strength increases through training. Skill develops through repetition. None of these processes require the absence of discomfort. When discipline is grounded in causal realism, it stops negotiating with feelings and starts working with mechanisms. Another important discipline that emerges here is the discipline of evidence-based self-assessment. Nyāya encourages evaluating beliefs based on observation rather than self-narrative. If you believe you can't focus, Nyāya would ask, under what conditions have you focused before? For how long? Doing what? This dissolves global self-judgments into specific, workable insights. The belief I lack discipline is epistemically invalid because it overgeneralizes from limited data. Correcting this belief removes a major obstacle to action. As these errors are corrected, a subtle shift occurs in how effort feels. Effort is no longer experienced as a personal strain, but as the application of correct means toward an end. There is less emotional charge around starting and stopping because the stakes have been reduced. You are not proving anything about yourself, you are testing hypotheses about cause and effect. This scientific attitude toward one's own behavior is one of Nyāya's most powerful contributions to self-discipline. This also changes how setbacks are interpreted. Instead of collapsing into self-blame, setbacks are analyzed. Which belief failed? Which inference was incorrect? Which cause was missing or misapplied? This analytical response preserves energy. It prevents the spiral of shame that often follows inconsistency and drains the capacity for renewed effort. Discipline survives because it is no longer tied to self-esteem. Nyāya further emphasizes the discipline of linguistic precision. Many internal beliefs are carried by vague language: I should, I can't, it's too much. These phrases feel meaningful but convey little information. When examined, they often conceal faulty reasoning. Precision forces clarity. What exactly is too much? What exactly is lacking? This clarification alone can transform paralysis into action because it reveals that the obstacle is smaller and more specific than assumed. Over time, this rational approach to discipline produces a form of steadiness that does not depend on emotional states. You act because the reasoning supports action, not because the moment feels right. This steadiness is resilient. It survives stress, boredom, and uncertainty because it is not built on fleeting conditions. It is built on understanding. In this way, Nyāya reframes discipline as an intellectual virtue. It is the virtue of thinking correctly under pressure. When reasoning improves, discipline no longer needs to be enforced. It emerges as the natural alignment between belief, action, and reality. As this rational discipline matures, something unexpected happens: the emotional drama surrounding self-discipline begins to fade. Not because emotions disappear, but because they are no longer mistaken for authorities. Nyāya would say that the mind has finally learned to respect jurisdiction. Feelings report sensations. Thoughts propose interpretations. Reason evaluates truth. When these roles are confused, discipline collapses. When they are clarified, discipline stabilizes without strain. At this stage, one of the most important disciplines within the Nyāya framework becomes the discipline of epistemic humility. This does not mean doubting everything indiscriminately, but recognizing how often the mind overestimates the reliability of its first impressions. A feeling of reluctance feels convincing precisely because it is immediate. A narrative about why something will fail feels persuasive because it is familiar. Nyāya trains the mind to say, quietly and consistently, this may not be true. That single sentence creates space. And in that space, action becomes possible. This humility also dismantles the habit of catastrophic reasoning, one of the most corrosive enemies of discipline. Many people abandon action not because the task is large, but because their inference about consequences is exaggerated. A small mistake is imagined to lead to humiliation. A slow start is imagined to confirm lifelong inadequacy. Nyāya identifies this as a failure of proportional reasoning. Causes do not produce infinite effects. Small causes produce small effects. When the mind relearns this basic causal truth, it stops freezing in the face of imagined disaster. Another discipline that crystallizes here is the discipline of separating probability from certainty. The undisciplined mind treats discomfort as a prediction. This will be painful, it says, and then behaves as though the pain were guaranteed, permanent, and unbearable. Nyāya reminds us that most future-oriented beliefs are probabilistic at best. Acting while uncertain is not irrational, it is unavoidable. Waiting for certainty is itself a logical error because certainty rarely precedes action in any real causal system. Once this is understood, hesitation loses its justification. This understanding also transforms how planning is approached. In many modern systems, planning becomes an emotional ritual designed to create reassurance. Lists are rewritten, tools are optimized, frameworks are endlessly refined, all to avoid the discomfort of beginning. Nyāya exposes this as another epistemic mistake, confusing preparation with causation. Planning may support action, but beyond a point it becomes a substitute for it. Rational discipline recognizes when a means has ceased to serve its end. When that recognition is clear, action resumes. As rational discipline deepens, the mind also learns to recognize motivated reasoning, the tendency to construct arguments that justify what one already wants to do or avoid. Nyāya treats this as a serious epistemic failure. Reasoning is meant to discover truth, not defend comfort. When the mind notices that it is selectively gathering evidence to excuse inaction, this recognition itself weakens the excuse. You cannot unsee a bad argument once you recognize it as such. This is one of the quiet powers of logic. It collapses rationalization without requiring force. Over time, this produces a form of internal honesty that is deeply stabilizing. You no longer need to lie to yourself about why you are avoiding something. You may still choose rest or delay, but the choice is explicit rather than disguised. This clarity preserves self-respect, and self-respect supports consistency. Discipline is difficult to maintain when the mind is constantly justifying itself with half-truths. Nyāya removes the need for justification by replacing it with understanding. Another discipline that emerges here is the discipline of incremental causality. Nyāya emphasizes that effects arise through accumulation, not through dramatic leaps. Modern discipline often fails because people expect immediate transformation. When it does not occur, they infer that effort is pointless. This inference is logically invalid. Most causal processes require repetition. When the mind internalizes this, it stops interpreting slow progress as failure. Consistency becomes easier because expectations have been corrected. This correction has a profound emotional effect. Much of the pain around discipline comes from mismatch between expectation and reality. When reality is slow and expectations are immediate, frustration is inevitable. Nyāya resolves this by aligning belief with how causation actually works. Once beliefs are realistic, emotional turbulence decreases. Action continues not because it feels good, but because it makes sense. At this point, discipline becomes surprisingly calm. There is no internal shouting, no dramatic self-talk, no heroic struggle. There is simply the application of correct means toward understood ends. If energy is low, the cause is investigated rather than condemned. If attention wanders, the conditions are adjusted rather than moralized. This calm is not passivity, it is precision. One of the most powerful consequences of this approach is how it reshapes identity. Instead of seeing oneself as a disciplined or undisciplined person, one begins to see oneself as a learner refining their understanding of cause and effect. Identity shifts from moral categories to epistemic ones. You are not good or bad at discipline, you are more or less accurate in your reasoning at any given moment. This shift alone removes a tremendous psychological burden. Nyāya also subtly dismantles the myth of inner conflict. When reasoning is corrected, there is less internal opposition because fewer parts of the mind are being misled. Much of what feels like conflict is actually confusion. When confusion clears, alignment follows. Action no longer feels like something done against oneself, but something done with coherence. In modern life, this framework offers a radical alternative to motivational culture. Instead of asking how to feel more driven, Nyāya asks how to think more clearly. Instead of asking how to overpower resistance, it asks whether resistance has been granted authority it does not deserve. Instead of asking how to become disciplined, it asks which beliefs are currently undermining action. By the time this rational discipline is fully integrated, self-discipline no longer feels like a personality trait. It feels like good hygiene. Just as physical hygiene prevents illness by removing contaminants, epistemic hygiene prevents inconsistency by removing false beliefs. You clean up faulty inferences as they arise. You correct assumptions before they harden into habits. You trust reasoning more than mood. This is the final lesson of Nyāya for self-discipline. Behavior does not need to be forced when belief is accurate. The mind naturally moves toward what it understands to be effective. When discipline collapses, it is rarely because effort is impossible. It is because understanding has been compromised. Restore understanding, and effort reorganizes itself. Seen this way, self-discipline is not a moral achievement, nor a test of character. It is the lived expression of clear thinking under uncertainty. When reasoning improves, discipline stops being a struggle and becomes a consequence. Not dramatic, not heroic, but dependable. And in a world filled with emotional noise and distorted inference, that quiet dependability may be the most disciplined state of all.